going to be so pissed.
It shows the content of this meeting is being sent to YouTube on my side.
Same.
All right. Let's see if it's hard to tell. It kind of looks like we're on. God, I hate it when people start live streams like this too. It's like, what? All right. In theory, we are good to go. I'm checking my other screen. Yay. All righty. Apparently, we are live in all the places. Hi. All right. So, well, that was distracting. If you are here for the CraftLit live stream or you are showing up shortly for the CraftLit live stream, hi there. I'm Heather, host of CraftLit, and I have here with me two awesome Austinian book lovers. So we had Becca with us last time. So this time I'm going to start by introducing Lisa, who comes from all sorts of Austen-y, Bronte-y places. So I wanted to make sure you got a
Yeah.
chance to tell everybody who you are.
Okay, I want to preface and say I never thought I was an Austen superfan until I listed everything that I do for Austen in the email to you, Heather. It's like, oh my God. I think because I don't go to the AGM or buy Regency clothes or travel to England to go to Bath or Chowton, I'm not a super fan. But clearly,
Yeah.
I'm wearing my obstinate headstrong girl t-shirt. So, anyways, um, my name is Lisa. I'm a librarian, a bookseller, and a writer. I live in northern Michigan with my husband, who I sometimes like, and our pug, Thursday. I run a tiny little Jane Austen and Bronte empire called Excessively Diverting. And it actually started out as an Etsy store about 12 years ago. I was making Austen and Bronte and other classic lit crafts and selling it on Etsy. And I was in grad school at the time, and school got really overwhelming, and I was looking for a full-time job and all that good stuff too. So I closed the store down. And then about 5 or 6 years later, I kept the domains, excessivelydiverting.net, and I wanted to do something special. So in 2017, I started the blog. And I'm I don't want to say my expertise, but my super major interest is in Austen and popular culture and how she's viewed in the 21st century. So I started collecting like various different things and writing about it. So I have Austen lip balm, I have Austen candles, I have Austen pops, I have a lot of Austen shit.
I love it.
Um, and the blog did okay, but I got a lot more uh, comments, followers, engagement on social media. So I took down the blog and just pointed the URL to Excessively Diverting's Facebook page. And I post, so now we're on Facebook, Mastodon, Blue Sky, Instagram. Um, Over on my TikTok, my personal TikTok, I'm actually reading Pride and Prejudice with commentary and swears, which I started in August.
I love that.
So every episode is I'm reading a chapter, I'm adding commentary as I read, and I have a potty mouth. So I get very angry at some aspects of how people perceive some of Austen's work. So I need to comment on that quite a bit. Um, and that's actually on hiatus right now because a lot of life stuff happened. So I'm going to pick it up back in end of the month. I do have to give a shout out I have Flat Jane.
Oh,
And Flat
what?
Jane is a project started by the Jasna chapter of Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho. And so the idea is that you take Flat Jane with you wherever you go and you take pictures of her and you post it on social media. So Jane's been with me to the vet, to the library. She went apple picking with me, post office. Like she just goes, I just take her with me everywhere I go. Um, so I thought I would mention her in today. So
I love it.
um Yeah, so that's Flat Jane. And that's pretty much it for me.
I that's not nothing.
There were so many points where I just wanted to be like, wait, stop, say more.
I know. Yes, exactly. All right, I am updating the link in Instagram because this is, oh no, stupid. Now on. So what happened is we are broadcasting not on the CraftLit channel, but on my personal channel because Zoom failed us. So I'm just updating people on that because I don't come with an assistant. But Becca, you need to tell everybody about yourself.
Yeah, well, I don't really know how to follow Lisa, but I'll try. I was just listening. I was like, oh man, I'm so uncool. I basically am just a giant Jane Austen fan, book enthusiast generally. I, I've been reading Austen since I was a kid, like most people, and I've just been getting more and more obsessed with time. I was very, very lucky when I was in school to take a class. I actually took a couple of classes with Dr. Janine Barcas, who is, of course, an Austen scholar. And, I already loved Austen, but during those classes, I really loved Austen and I figured out how to unravel all the things that she's doing and how to articulate just how incredible she is. A lot of what we did was, just looking at like, okay, what are the words that she uses over and over again? What are the weird little objects that she drops that you can learn so much from if you go be like, what was that thing? And what was the cultural relevance of it? There are so many layers to what she was doing with her writing that I just think other people pale by comparison. So I really love the depth of her writing. Things that I do, I mean, I don't work with book things, unfortunately. I worked at an art museum for a while and I led the book club there for members, which was very fun. But now I'm somewhere else, not doing bookish things, which is why I love the CraftLit community so much because y'all are always willing to talk weird books with me. But I do have an Instagram and a blog, both Book It with Becca. And I've been pretty indifferent about posting for the past year just because life has been busy, good, but busy. But that's a good place to find me. You'll see frequent updates on what I'm reading or just like what my favorite new watches were, movies of the past month, because I also really love film. So that's me. I'm super excited for this talk because I always want to talk, Emma.
Yes. Oh my
I did
goodness.
read your blog post, Becca. So
Thank you.
I'm kind of prepped. But when Heather emailed me to start setting this up, I told her, I said, okay, I'm gonna need to speed read Emma this week because I haven't read it in a really long time. And that did not happen. So, but
Won't matter.
I do have some updated retellings of Emma. I have the manga, I have the graphic novel, and I forgot it was called the Jane Austen Project. I forgot who the publisher was, but contemporary authors were asked to do an update on a particular Austen story. So, for example, Curtis Sittenfeld did an update of Pride and Prejudice, where Lizzie and Darcy are having hate sex. It's fantastic. Um, but Alexander McCall Smith did an update of Emma, and she's an advertising exec. Same, same premise. She's meddling in other people's lives, except, it's brought up to the 21st century. So for those of you who are watching or listening, you can speed read your way through Emma pretty quickly by reading the manga. You won't get the nuances or the deliciousness of Austen's language, but you'll at least get the gist of the story.
Just good.
And there are also some very good movie adaptations too, which probably takes even less time.
Yeah,
That is true.
that's true.
I have heard about the manga version. I have not read it yet. Read it yet. Um, how'd you like it?
I did review it. I'm also a reviewer for No Flying No Tights, which is a graphic novel slash manga review site that's run by a librarian for librarians. So all the reviewers are librarians or somehow connected to the library world. I think there's even a few booksellers. Um,
That's good.
it's fine. I had some quibbles about some of the language that was used. I felt like Austen's genius was kind of lost. I felt it catered more toward telling the story rather than being influenced by Austen telling the story. Um, Another quibble, and this is a big one in the Janeite community, is the clothing representation. We're not Regency correct. So I had to
Yep.
do my own. It's the clothing situation was one of those things like I kind of knew that it wasn't correct, but I had to do my research just to be on the safe side to make the commentary and the review.
Yep.
Um, the graphic novel is a lot better, and the Alexander McCall Smith retelling of Emma is hilarious. So I greatly recommend. If I mean, if you're a manga reader, read the manga.
Yeah.
You'll get the essence, but it doesn't showcase Austen's brilliance.
I mean,
Did
no one can showcase Austen's brilliance like Austen can.
That's
I've
true.
read a
That's
lot
true.
of retellings of her work, and some of them I really liked, and some of them I didn't. But always at the end of it, I'm just like, wow, like there's a lot of confidence that goes into thinking that you can retell an Austen story. It's
Oh,
just like,
absolutely. Absolutely. And that was one of the things that kind of spun me towards becoming more in touch with the community, the pop culture community as far as Austen is concerned, because there's oodles and oodles and oodles of paraliterature book of retellings of her stories in a variety of different genres and settings. And it's it's I actually started keeping a list on Amazon, a wish list on Amazon of all the paraliterature that was coming out by us
it
that was
drives me
Austen
crazy.
based. So whether it was
wow.
by either somehow it was either inspired by Austen or um it was a retelling or something, and the list just got obnoxiously long and I can't keep up with it. So I do read Austen paraliterature on occasion, but um, it's
Is
the
is this the site where you started keeping track on your most
uh
unreliable narrator?
that's actually my website. That's one of my websites. But that's
That's
actually a
cool.
listing of all the Austen and Bronte television and movies that are available for
Ah,
streaming.
okay.
No
That's
books.
I've linked to that though.
Okay, yeah. That's I started as a librarian, I track stuff. It's part of my nature. And I was curious to see how much content was out there on streaming on Austen and the Brontes. And there's a lot. There's, I think, over like 180, 200 different
Wow.
TV shows and miniseries and movies, all having to do with Austen, either retellings or paraliterature movies or something having to do with it.
Right.
Um, and then I organize, because I am that person, I organize it by streaming service. It's US based only. I have to make that clear because I do have a lot of people who follow me from other countries who are like, oh, this is great. Oh, this is for US stuff. Like, you know, so it is what it
Yep.
is. But that gets updated quarterly. I used to update it more
Impressed.
frequently, but yeah,
I
it's
am impressed.
thank you.
That's a lot. That is a lot to keep up with. And
Yes.
that's uh yeah. That's the kind of that whole side of doing
But I'm not an Austen super fan by any stretch of the imagination.
Obviously, you devote
yeah.
so little time and energy to it.
No.
You're a real slacker there. I'm kind of
Yeah.
embarrassed. I'm worried.
the funny thing is I do make fun of the Austen super fans.
Me too.
'Cause,
But there are different levels of
Yeah.
super fanity.
Well, and there are different kinds too. Like
Yeah.
there are
mm.
the people who love to go to all the balls and dress up, which is amazing. But like, I don't think that's, greater or lesser than, the ones who just read all of the books and find all of the historical research. And there are people who do both. Like it's like apples and oranges. Like everybody's just enjoying it.
And that's to me the main thing is Austen should be enjoyed. And
Yes.
my pearls get clutched when I'm trying to look at how to phrase this politely.
Do it. Just do it.
Say it.
Okay, my pearls get clutched when the boomers get very upset about contemporary retellings of Austen. Um, I adored Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, the movie. I just thought it was fantastic.
So much
And I have my little pops here of Lizzie and Darcy. Um, they live on my desk.
Everybody needs a
Um,
Funko Pop of Lizzie and Darcy.
yes. I I enjoy the recent adaptation with Dakota Johnson of Persuasion. That is a definite mood killer if you talk about it in Austen groups, Austen circles. 2005 Pride and Prejudice to me trumps the 1995 version.
Including Colin Firth, though?
Yeah, I mean, he's hot, don't get me wrong. It's just like, I start clutching pearls because the the this is a hill I stand on. So
for it.
cut me
Race
off
me.
if I get cut me
Yeah.
off if I get to be too indignant about it. Um the 2005 version tells the story of Pride and Prejudice from a view that makes Austen accessible to newer generations. Um you do you get the brilliance? Not really. But I also think the same could be said for the 1995 miniseries.
They all
When
have
people
their
start talking
limitations.
about, yeah, when people start arguing that 1995 version is better, I'm like, Darcy didn't come out of a lake wearing a wet shirt. I'm sorry, that just did not happen. So
No,
don't give don't give me this argument that that version is better.
Colin
Um,
Firth did get wet, though, didn't he?
yeah,
In a white
no,
shirt, but
but
he didn't
in the
come
book,
out of the.
Darcy
No,
did.
no, no. I thought, oh, in the book. Oh,
Colin
yeah.
Firth
No, no, no.
definitely went into the lake and came out just
Yeah.
like dripping hotness. But that didn't happen in the book.
Okay.
no, it did not.
But
Um,
also neither did Lizzie and Darcy make out on a table with the servants watching. So, it's all fine.
it's 2005 version is my go-to movie. I mean, I keep a copy of it on my laptop. It's on my iPad. I watch it several times a year. Um, I to me, it's the message and not the medium. It's more important that people get Austen. She's never been out of print
Yeah.
ever,
Yeah.
ever, 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 ever.
Yep.
Um, New generations are discovering her.
Yep.
And it just drives me crazy when there's gatekeeping that happens because Austen, her book was popular literature
Yeah.
and she should be for the masses. And that's just quite simply put. And the issue, and maybe Becca can speak on this too, the issue with the Genite community is if you're not more academic-y, if you're not like living the Austen life rigorously, you're not a true Austen fan. A friend of mine is on the board for the New Jersey Janza chapter, and she wanted to bring me in as a presenter and talking about Austen and pop culture. And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. Um, and the board knocked it down. They thought it was inappropriate. And my Jasna chapter, when I was living in Kentucky, same thing. I proposed a telling on Austen and the pop culture and how she's been influential and what we can take from her today. And they voted that down as well. And they'd rather talk about lace making in Regency England than, expand their opinions on Austen. So,
And why can't we have both? I mean, I'm going to read you guys a letter. And Becky, you've probably already heard this. I'm going to read you guys an email that we got from listener Irina, and it dovetails off of what Lisa was just saying. She writes, first, it occurred to me how modern are the problems and challenges that Emma faces compared to many other Austenian heroes. She doesn't need to find a good match. In fact, the decision to whom or even if to marry seems to be completely her own. She manages quite competently her household, and she has a lot of freedom in making decisions. Moreover, she's surrounded by people, both men and women, who respect and support her. What she struggles with is the lack of life experiences, the ability to read people's motivations and intentions, and some overconfidence in her own ability. Pretty much what all of us go through at a certain age. I wonder if this modernity is what makes Emma so irritating for some people. It just hits too close to home. And then she says, continuing this line of thought, I realize that Emma appears to be quite feminist in how her female characters handle themselves. For example, Jane Fairfax does not try to find a good match to settle down, but rather she is preparing to embark on an undesirable career to support herself. And how many current college grads face that same issue?
And that also kind of touches on another thing that I find fascinating about Austen is what she's actually writing and how we talk about her in pop culture. I think that a lot of times among Janeites, whether diehard or casual, there's kind of a fetishization of, being a woman back then is like, oh, it's all the pretty laces and you got to find a husband and all this stuff. And I'm like, if you read the books, they're actually very practical problems and solutions going on. And, it's not all about like, oh, I must find a rich husband. It's like, that would be nice. That is the fantasy. And that does happen to a few of the characters like Lizzie. But there are practical day-to-day things that they're actually dealing with, like how do I deal with my nosy neighbors? And we've got to pay the cook and the housekeeper and things like that. And it's not this, I don't know how to describe it. There is a weird fetishization of just like how feminine and dainty it is and how simple it all is, and kind of, talking about it as if it's more regressive than it actually is.
Yes.
Especially with the whole husband hunting thing, which is just like the people obsessed with that in the books are the ones who are wrong.
Yes. Over and over again.
Mrs. Bennet, like, she's being kind of made fun of. She's not the person leading the conversation of the book. She's the one that we're kind of in conversation with as feminists trying to figure out how to navigate the world. So that's something that Irina's letter made me think of this time.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Mrs. Bennet is
we could talk all day about her.
Right.
See, and I argue her and Mr. Bennet were in love wholeheartedly.
We are going to have to do another live stream post or midway through Pride and Prejudice because I'm redoing it. That was my first book on CraftLit back in 2006. And since then, I've gotten better at what I do. And since then, the readers we have access to have gotten better. So I'm rebooting all of that. That was going to be my next thing to do in between books. But then I started Vindication on the Rights of Women because that seemed more useful
still need to read
right
that.
now. You don't need to. I read it to you. Just watch it on CraftLit because it is okay. If you've ever read Nathaniel Hawthorne or Melville, she uses more commas and semicolons than they do. It took me an hour to figure out how to parse 7 pages so that I could say them out loud in a way that made sense. So do not read it yourself. It would be a waste of your time. Instead, just follow the the playlist over on CraftLit. And I'm not just tooting my own horn. I mean, I cannot imagine having to try and read that with the way our brains are all like me right now.
Right.
Not going to happen. But super important because, oh my God, Jane Austen gets her snark straight from Mary Wollstonecraft.
Well, she was in direct lines too in Pride and
Yeah.
Prejudice.
No,
Like
she
the
actually
whole
does.
Mr. Collins' proposal, I'm a rational creature. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, she does. And I think Pride and Prejudice is the only one where she makes a direct. I mean, it's all over the place, but I think that's the only one that it's really clearly direct in.
Makes sense because like the themes of that book are very much about like women's education.
Yeah, which is Mary Wollstonecraft's whole thing. But she is absolutely a snarkmeister in going after Edmund Burke and this Talleyrand, this guy who dissed her publicly for her vindication of the rights of man, which she did first, because he had thought that education and everything was really, and the French Revolution was really just for rich people. And she had a little bone to pick with that. So yeah, she's our people. And she comes across as being kind of it's the preciousness thing that I worried about, because it's just like with Austen. She talks about like things like virtue, and she talks about morals, but she's not talking about sexual morals or sexual virtue. She's talking about like, if you are going to expand your life and have a soul, a life of the mind, a life of the heart, a life at all, that's what she's calling virtue. And you're then restricting only that to men and men's education, and then dissing women because all they are is empty-headed fools, because that's how you're training them, then I don't think the women have the problem.
Wollstonecraft does not have a leg to stand on about sexual morals. He just
No, she
does not.
couldn't. No, and that's my point, is that she looks, because you look at the pictures of her, she looks all old-fashioned and prim and proper. No, no, she was out there. It's just that the language she's using is so old and creaky that it would be so easy to just read it and go, oh, well, I don't need to read any more of this. She's just going to be telling me not to, fill in the blank, when in fact she was really saying, no, you really should be doing all of the blanks and filling them in.
Speaking of old and creaky language, I had read somewhere Austen was inspired by Tom Jones. And so I made my husband read it with me. I go,
I love your
I
husband.
got, oh, he hates me for this. I got, I don't know, quarter of the way through, and I'm like, I can't take this. I just can't do it. And he read the entire thing.
God
And
bless him.
yeah, he's like, I'll never do this again with you. You're not recommending another book. And I was like,
Did he see any parallels?
he doesn't like Austen.
Oh, wow, it must be love.
Well, then you can keep coming over here and getting your Austen fix. That's fine. I understand. I don't know how you do it, but okay.
I think I could deal with indifferent, but I think hate is
Well, maybe hate is too strong of a word. Yeah, we work. We've known each other for 27 years and been together for 18.
Well done.
I think, yeah, we work as a couple, but we have very divergent tastes in quite a lot of things. And on one hand, it is a good thing because, we learn from each other and we
Right.
influence each other, but we don't talk about Austen. So she's definitely not a common topic in our household, which is fine. So
That's fine. We'll let it go. We'll still like him. It's fine.
Yeah, no one is perfect.
No,
he did read Tom Jones. So
which is really
so there's
something.
that.
I cannot imagine that book has aged well, especially post 2016. I just don't see how that book could be okay anymore. That Moll Flanders, there's a whole mess load of books that I think no, that windows on those closed for CraftLit. But I do want to show you this, at least the first part of a video clip. There's several there's several different clips that I've pieced together, and they all come from the Morgan Library in New York City. Back in 2010, they did like kind of a retrospective thing on Austen, and they had some of her letters there, and all of this kind of thing. And then they brought in authors and writers, mostly authors, writers, and actors, who came in and talked about why they loved Austen. But the opening one is the one that surprised me the most. And this is not the entire clip. This is just a piece of it, but I could not help myself. I really, really wanted to share this with you. All right, I am hoping that the sound will work. So let's pray.
How you doing, my brother? God bless you. God bless you. Follow me around.
I'll show you how. What is your favorite Austen novel or character, and why?
I would say it would be Emma. I think Emma is not just a masterpiece, much like Chekhov's Three Sisters. It's the fusion, I think, of her own sense of suspicion of conventional morality on the one hand, but also knowing you can't have an isolated quest for individual will independent of a social context that could lead toward either disaster or even a cynicism of soul. And you get this wonderful fusion of Emma where she actually remains Socratic. She is involved in a quest and a seeking of self-knowledge, and yet at the same time she recognizes she must acknowledge the social context. She can't be a kind of sentimental subversive, nor should she be a conformist who is deferential to custom. So that you get a fusion in Emma, and in so many ways I think that that is her masterpiece.
Do you have a least favorite novel, and why? Is there any of her novels that you think don't quite work?
No, I tend to be a Jane Austen freak, I think. Certainly politically, she and I would have been on very, very different sides of the fence, as it were. So I wouldn't say it's unappealing. I just say I put it in context and recognize that as the grand genius that she was like all great artists, not simply a transcender of her age, but also a child of her age. So she was able to transcend her age in writing works that are timeless, which is to say they have something to say for every time. But she's also a human being. She's a child of her age. British imperialism, the patriarchy that still she's wrestling with. Many of her characters, of course, quite famously wrestling with marriage as the end all and be all in a certain sense, even though within that marriage you want self-realization, self-fulfillment. So there's a number of different political aspects that I would clash with Jane Austen. I'm a deep Democrat with tilts toward always focusing on the poor, and the least of these as both Christian and deep Democrat. She also is Christian. It's very interesting. She's a Christian Stoic. I'm much more of a Christian Jacobian. And that's an interesting juxtaposition we need not get into at the moment. But I've got some deep differences with her, even as I acknowledge her unadulterated genius. It must be said that one of the great oppositions in the modern world is the opposition between Jane Austen and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson, New World, American, preoccupied with self-creation, self-refashioning, the imagination playing a fundamental role in reshaping self and world, always suspicious of constraints, always trying to transgress and transform and transcend constraints. Jane Austen, constraints, 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 suspicious of transgression, suspicious of the imagination running too wild, resulting in a transcendence of constraints. Emma, the masterpiece of Jane Austen, a balance between constraints and will and imagination. Ralph Waldo Emerson, always suspicious of constraints, which means that the world of Jane Austen will always be too narrow, too pinched, too circumscribed, and like Prometheus, Ralph Waldo Emerson wants to break out. Fascinating tension between the two. I happen to be in love with both of them.
So I'm going to pause there. There are some other clips. But I thought Cornel West, as much as he loves Emma and Jane Austen, missed some of the subversive things that are going on in Jane Austen. And admittedly, this was 10 years ago, and most of the books that I have been reading, like the Post-Colonial Jane Austen is an older one, but Morality and Conversation in Austen, and there are several other ones that are that really look at the history. Like the first, what was it? The first two episodes of Emma that we did on CraftLit, where I had just downloaded out of my brain a whole dumpster load of new scholarship on Austen. She was so edgy in so many ways. And in fact, there was one person who wrote in saying something about Mr. Elton, that Mr. Elton, no, it wasn't. It was about the Gilbert Markham in Tenant of Wildfell Hall being a gentleman farmer, and Robert Martin in Emma being a tenant farmer, except that Mr. Knightley calls Robert Martin a gentleman. I'm sorry, they're both gentleman farmer. Knightley calls Robert Martin a gentleman farmer when he's not the landowner. And that this would have been a subversive act. This would have been Knightley breaking rules in society to point out to the readers through Jane Austen, but also in the book, like, no, this is a good guy. This is a stand-up guy, and he's going to be great for Harriet. And I think people, it took me a while to read up on this. I think people think that that was a mistake. Like he should have been a tenant farmer instead of a gentleman farmer. But I think that's just another one of Austen's like little.
I have so many thoughts. I have so many thoughts. I mean, yes, I absolutely love that. And the whole idea of a gentleman in name versus a gentleman in soul and action. And I totally agree with Cornel West that Emma is Jane Austen's masterpiece because she is doing so much with it. She's so ambitious and so successful with it. And I think a lot of what she is doing, particularly with Mr. Knightley, is like, I think she's writing her ideal man.
Yes.
Because so many of her books are, you know, through the male characters, she is showing you what is worthy, you know, like what is worth your time, girls. But also just like, what is a good man? What are the qualities to look for? And so you see, you know, like in Northanger Abbey and Pride and Prejudice and all these others, you know, like a gentleman, you know, not just in name, you know, he's a good dancer, even if he doesn't particularly like it. He's well read. He is concerned with the people in his family and his community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're reading through Emma, you're just like, okay, check, 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 check. Mr. Knightley, he dances, he reads poetry. He's very involved with his community and his loved ones, and he is always looking out for people. And so, you know, it's like, okay, Mr. Knightley is like her blueprint for like, okay, look for a person like this. But going back to West a little bit, I think when he's talking about Austen and Emerson and constraint versus transcendence, he's missing gender.
Yes.
Because they are able to do those very different things in very different ways, only because of who they are. Like Austen cannot transcend like Emerson because she is a woman in a man's world.
Yeah.
Writing books that are being read by more than just women. They're being read by the Prince Regent.
Yes. Who she didn't like.
She did not. And she has to be very careful. And, you know, there are just things that a male writer can do that a female writer can't. But I think that that challenge is something that just pushes her to be greater because the subversion is so subtle and so well done and so thoughtful. Okay, I will let y'all talk now.
I think that's why it's so modern. Keep going, Lisa.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking when he was talking about like Austen with British imperialism and colonialism and this, that, and then some, I'm like, has he not read Mansfield Park? I
Yeah.
mean, she's completely rejecting the whole idea of slavery in the West Indies. I mean, her
And in Emma too.
In Emma.
yeah, and one of her brothers was an abolitionist.
Yep.
So I think he's doing Austen a little disservice.
Mhm.
She rejects a lot of things in her novels, and you'll have to excuse me. It's Mansfield Park is not a favorite, so I haven't read it in a very long time.
No,
Me either.
it's nobody's favorite. Let's be honest. I mean,
No.
Yeah.
nobody here.
No.
All right, good. But she skewers like Northanger Abbey was her skewering against Gothic novels. As an example, there's so much that Austen skewers, she rejects, and that's what makes her one of the things that makes her timeless is just that we can read Emma and we can see how the youth of today are acting. I mean, they're rejecting, us older generations very easily, just as Emma was rejecting, the older generations in her family
Yeah.
and in her community. So, um, yeah, I think, Cornel West is a brilliant man, but he just kind of missed the mark on a few
Well, and
things.
I think
So,
this really no, I think that's right. I think it really shows the difference that 14 years can make too, because a lot of the scholarship that I was reading from, like one of the things, I don't know if you caught this in or if you remember this from Emma, I certainly didn't catch it my first 7 times through, was Mrs. Elton, who we all love to hate, who, as listener Kathy says, Mrs. Bates or Miss Bates cares about everybody, talks about everybody. Mrs. Elton only cares about herself, only talks about herself in ways that elevate herself in at least in her own standing and tries to do it in others. And and that is Jane Austen's point. It's like you can be talkative and that's fine, or you can be talkative and destructive. And Miss Bates is on the positive side. But the one of the reasons I brought Mrs. Elton up is because at the very, very beginning, when everybody's like, oh my goodness, Mr. Elton is getting married. What's going on? Well, comma, her family's in business in Bristol, comma. What we didn't know, what I certainly didn't know, is that Bristol was one of the port towns where slaves came in. That was one of the hubs of the slavery market. And so
I didn't know that.
when somebody is like from Bristol back then, it would have been a code for, well, if they're in business,
Mhm.
that's pretty much all you need to know. And we lose so much of that context. And I wouldn't have, I mean, the annotated version that I got of Emma came out within the last 5 years. I would never have known otherwise. And I don't know if anybody who's our age or younger living in England would necessarily even know unless they studied it, which makes me happy. And Lisa, you have to show everybody your shirt.
Um,
I love that.
um, I was debating on wearing it because, it's a Pride and Prejudice quote from Lady Catherine de Bourgh. But in a lot of ways, Emma is an obstinate, headstrong girl. I mean, she's doing her thing. I mean, her goal in life is to match make and make everybody happy. She like we talked about earlier, she doesn't have to worry about finding a suitor. She's well taken care of. She's beloved by her family. She can pretty much do whatever she wants, which is kind of the antithesis of women her age, 20, 18, 19, 20,
Yep.
during the Regency era. So yeah, I mean, Emma is totally an obstinate, headstrong girl. So yeah, I knew the shirt had to be worn.
Yeah, that's a good one. And Becca, you have another one that I think.
I do. Mine says bookmarks are for quitters. And this is actually from CraftLit friend Amy Woolwine's Etsy shop. So
Oh, I
everyone
will
go
be.
over there to Janice Designs. And I think you have it linked on your website, don't you, Heather?
I do, and I'm going to add.
Go over there. She's got great stuff.
I'm going to add a link in the show notes to this episode too, because she does. She has a lot of good bookish stuff.
And some Austen stuff as well, if I remember.
Yeah, and even Emma, because she did the Emma bags for us.
Right. Yeah. And also going back again.
Yeah.
When West talks about like the sexual politics of Jane Austen, missing something else there,
Mhm.
which is that the sexual politics of that are not always about Jane Austen's view. They're usually about the social climate. Like she's actually surprisingly not judgmental of, you know, fallen women, or whatever you say. She's just pointing out like society is really hard on them. And so that's why you want to be careful.
Yeah.
And even, you know, like the rakish characters, she's not saying it's bad that they're out there having sex. She's saying that it's bad that they're out there having irresponsible sex and ruining young women's lives.
Yeah.
So I think that is also something that kind of gets lost. And, you know, maybe she was a prude. I don't know. But knowing some of the jokes that she made in her books and outside, probably not.
Yeah.
Just much more concerned with like, this is the reality that we are living in, unfortunately, still today to a certain degree. And as women, we got to deal with it.
It would have been
Lydia
hard to.
Bennett is
Yes.
a perfect example of that. I mean, um, somewhere, I don't know if it's a direct quote, you know, she's described as a flirt. She runs off with Wickham. I mean, her and Kitty are totally yucking it up with the regiments that are coming into town. You know, that's and Lydia trying to live her best life is in Austen's time reflecting poorly on her family. And that's something that Darcy brings up. I know we keep talking about Pride and Prejudice. I'm sorry.
No,
Um,
it's fine. It's all good.
uh,
Kidding.
you know, and that's something that Darcy brings up is that Lizzie's association with her family and the way that her family is portrayed makes her a less than desirable partner. And I think, oh my gosh, like I said, I haven't read Emma in a million years, but Jane Fairfax has kind of seen that as well. Do I have the right character?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and Emma kind of gets a little snobby about it as well, if I recall correctly, but she kind of gets over herself, you know,
Yeah,
eventually.
she gets idgy about different things with Jane Fairfax. I think the thing that always surprised me um was Emma's ain't no thing attitude to Harriet not knowing who her parents were.
Yeah.
That and so the assumption is that she's only got one, and that's not somebody who was married. And yet, even though Emma is the, you know, the queen of the ball in Highbury, she's still really fiercely Harriet's friend. And I mean, she's a little nuts to think that Harriet and Knightley could ever get together and have it be okay on Knightley's side of things. But
Well, I think that was all her own insecurities.
oh
Were-
yeah. No, I think so too. But and I think it was also there was something about Emma seeing the two of them getting along together that made her just so unjustly happy until she realized that no, it's Harriet's actually got a crush on him. That's bad. But he just kind of dismissed Harriet for so long during what 2/3 of the book, and then he's like, no, actually, you did a really good job helping her grow up some,
Mhm.
and now you just have to grow up some yourself.
So, are we going to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the 2020 adaptation of Emma?
Okay.
I
Something.
Yeah, start with it. You start.
I actually really enjoyed it. There were only a couple of moments where I was just like, what the heck are you doing? To me, the importance of an adaptation is not that it be 100% accurate word for word, but that it capture the spirit and the heart of the story, which I thought that movie did pretty well. And I really loved the emphasis that it put on Harriet and Emma's friendship, which I think often gets kind of just played for comedy or overlooked, but that had some lovely weight. My main issues with that movie, I had to, no, one of my friends, she's obsessed with the idea that Knightley was out there running in the streets. She just is like, that's too far. And I'm like, it's fine. They made him a younger man, whatever. It fits with the tone of the movie. For me, I didn't like how John Knightley was portrayed. I thought they made him, you know, more like a annoyed husband in Sense and Sensibility instead of like Mr. John Knightley, who loves his family. And he's just cranky because he can't just be with his family at home. But the thing that really got me was the nosebleed. I I remember I was sitting in the theater, I was watching it. This was like 2 days before we went into lockdown, by the way.
Oh my goodness.
I know. I was watching it and that happened. And I literally leaned forward and whispered, "What the hell?" Because it just was so out of nowhere and out of the blue. And I was like, okay, in that moment, the movie was clearly very uncomfortable with sincerity and felt like it needed to undercut this like iconic moment and very heartfelt scene. And I was just like, so close to the landing. But overall, I thought it was fun. Like, obviously, the clothing is a whole separate issue, but I also really love A Knight's Tale. So, like, I can hand wave it. It's fine.
Which part of the clothing were you not into? Because at
Uh,
least they wore hats.
They did wear hats, but there were just like some weird things. Like she would walk around with a detached collar just as a necklace or something. And I remember there was a lot of discussion about it, like on historical clothing and Austen YouTube. And I was like, it's fine. People were upset about it. I wasn't that much because I was just like, they're going for a visual style,
Yeah.
which I don't mind.
What did you think, Lisa?
That was all right.
It's okay. I can like that, and you can like 2005 Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, I mean, I have Hills that stand on. I mean, don't forget I like the 2002 version of Persuasion, so let's not forget that one.
Yes, I think we're
Um,
all. Is this
You mean the
Amanda?
2022 version of
yeah,
Persuasion?
Oh,
yeah.
I,
It's
I could have
fun.
a whole rant about Persuasion adaptations, but continue.
That's, this is what makes the community so great, is
Yeah.
that, you have your hills you stand on, and you need to bring it, if you are standing on that hill. No, I mean, Emma was enjoyable. I liked how they lit the scenes. Emma is a very bright, cheerful character. The clothing she wore was very bright. They made Anya Taylor-Joy very well lit. Like, Emma doesn't live in shadows. She's very much, she has a bubbly personality. She's very much out there. And I like the way they portrayed her as that personality and character in the movie. I agree with Becca, the nosebleed thing. I was like, what?
yeah,
What's this? Um, the
yeah.
thing that has always I mean, I'm glad they made Knightley a little bit younger. It's always kind of creeped me out how much older he was than her, but at the same time, I had to kind of reconcile that that was the period. It is what it is. But that doesn't mean I'm still not,
My husband's grandmother was 17 years apart from her husband, and that
yeah, I mean,
was, she just died, I don't know, 10 years ago.
yeah, I'm 7 years older than my husband, so I guess there's that. But I mean, now we would call what Knightley was doing with Emma grooming. So,
Okay.
Okay.
Would we
so we
call
got
it
we got
actually doing grooming, or would we just call it grooming because he's older? Because I don't think his behavior or treatment toward Emma is in any way trying to endear himself or set him up as some great authority figure. I think he's just a really good friend to her, but they happen to have like 16 years apart and they happen to fall in love. So I don't
It's
think he's
interesting too,
actually
because
grooming, but I think people often think he is just because he's older and he's known her since she was a child.
well, and I think
right, yeah.
we have the benefit because Lisa didn't just finish the book with us, that
Yeah.
the my vibe, I think all of our vibes for so long had been, this is kind of creepy and just a little too much. But
Not
there are
me. I'm
several
fine.
points. Well, yeah, you're different.
I read
You're
Elsie
better.
Dinsmore, which was actually grooming. So this
Oh,
is
okay. Yeah, no, this is no. But the thing that I thought was interesting was that more often than not, when Knightley is like being critical or whatever, you can tell if you go back, but you can also tell even at the end that he was in no way doing any of that expecting anything.
Mhm.
You know, there was no point in time where, and anywhere up until the last, what is it, the last 4 chapters in the book when he finally breaks down and goes, "Oh my God, I have to admit to myself that I love you." Um, Up until that point, he he had all sorts of assumptions that she was going to, especially marry Frank Churchill, and he was surviving that just fine. There was no weird bitterness up until the point that he found out that Frank had been a jerk and that Jane had been lying with Frank, and then
Lying with Frank.
lying with Frank and lying with Frank.
Maybe.
But I do think it bears rereading those last few chapters to see how Knightley doesn't present as a groomer, because I was
And
surprised rereading it again.
I can agree with that. I think, Becca made a great point. It's and I think that's something that we kind of need to think about that when we're talking about Austen, is that what was the norm for the Regency era is would be seen quite differently today. And the nuances, Heather, that you just mentioned about how Knightley was, a friend to her. He wasn't getting butt hurt because she may have ran off with Churchill. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of the conversations when we
Yeah.
talk about Austen
Nuance.
is the nuance. And I think that's important. I think that's why the manga and the graphic novels and the retellings kind of exist, because we have to convey Austen's work in a way that makes it, I hate to say this, palatable for contemporary minds. And in a way, it's kind of a shame.
Is
I
it
have a really funny
palatable or recognizable?
both.
Okay.
I have a really funny comment. I'm a bookseller also by trade, and I was working at a bookstore about 10, 15 years ago. And I'm shelving books, and these two teenagers are walking by, and they're like, "Oh man, I don't want to read Austen. It's old English." And I'm like, yeah. I was just like, "Oh my God." I'm not going to. I desperately wanted to pull them aside. I'm like, can we talk about linguistics here? Because Austen is not.
I mean, even Chaucer isn't Old English, right? He's Middle English.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, like,
early contemporary English starts with Shakespeare,
yeah.
and then it becomes more modern as you get to Austen and later. But yeah, I mean, Chaucer is Middle English, and Jane is definitely not old. But it's the use of language, which also changed. We can look at Jane, or we can look at Austen's work from a linguistics point of view, and how she uses language is completely different in how we use it today, which I think for some people, um, like Heather, you just said, I mean, it may not be recognizable
Yeah.
on some, lying with Frank.
Well, and I think that is exactly what's propelled CraftLit for so long, is that there's always another book where it's like, oh, well, we think we know this book, but I'm going to do the heavy lift and bring the research to you so that you can get all the inside jokes that we just miss,
Mhm.
because we do. And I get unhappy when I hear the not just the Janeites, but all the other English teachers, because I used to teach English, but all the other English teachers, and not even English teachers, English professors, who get very locked into their own track, not BARCHAS, who rocks my world.
She is all over the place and
She's
loves all the adaptations and
and
retellings and everything. It's
and
just,
you can tell when you read her books that she's just like Jane Love. But I
yes.
think that it makes me sad when people are willing to sacrifice the joy of the book and the limitations therefore that they're placing on it. To them, it's a very narrow kind of joy, when I feel like we're all talking about much more expansive. Like, we're seeing all these connections out from Jane Austen, whether it's historical parallels or contexts or modern parallels or contexts. Um, it all goes to the same happy place. And it makes me so sad when people won't go there. I don't know if you guys can see this. This was sent by listener Carrie. And this, she sent it because to her, this was an homage to Mr. Woodhouse, which again, it's one of those things do not change. People really do not change. How we say things, that might change. But even then,
I don't see any relation to his hypochondria.
no, but yeah, keep going.
So when they go to Donwell Abbey for the picnic in honor of Mrs. Elton, haha, Mr. Woodhouse comes along, and he's not really the type to go and sit out under a shade tree in the heat and all of that. But Mr. Knightley, knowing him so well, has prepared something to amuse him. He's gotten out all of these like old things from the family collection, like old medals or pictures and things like that, just a bunch of
Curiosity
small objects, curiosities, and laid them out so that Mr. Woodhouse can sit inside by the fire, away from the drafts, with someone beside him. Usually it's Mrs. Weston, because she's also not out traipsing around at the moment, and just look them over and enjoy talking about it and staring at everything. And so it's a collection of small objects.
I have some dates for you. March 29th, 1815 is when
Okay.
Emma was finished.
Okay.
So that means next year is its 210th anniversary. So looks like I have to write something special for the
Yeah.
and then July 6th is the day that Mr. Knightley proposes to Emma. The reason why I have these dates, I have a content calendar, and over time I started collecting. And the book was actually published December 23rd, 1815 by John Murray. So I have a lot of crazy dates, such as when Anne Elliot was born, and Harriet Smith was born June 23rd. Because there's a lot of Austen fans out there who read a very nuanced book, and they will pinpoint the dates of when specific things happen. And so I thought it'd be super cool that for my, Austen Empire, that I can celebrate those days as well. So for example, on the day of that Knightley proposes to Emma, I wrote a newsletter issue on engagement in the Regency era. So and people also enjoy the fact, like, how did you know that date was, don't look at me. Somebody else took the time and energy to do this.
It's all there in Austen's text.
Yeah. Somebody just
Yeah,
listed it out.
There was a person that I followed on Instagram that every month she published a calendar of what happened in Austen's world on that particular day and that month.
Wow. Her actual world, like Jane Austen's world, not the
And
lives of her characters.
no, both.
Both. Oh my goodness.
It was an intense calendar. She blocked me for some reason. So, like,
The nerve.
I'm sure it was
yeah, huh?
I'm sure it was an accident.
Oh, for sure. Well, it was annoying because she was
We'll say.
following me. It was annoying because she
Aw.
was following me, and then she blocked me. So yeah, I tried to get sneaky and created a ghost account to get the stupid account. And she had asked me a question when I had started following her, and she saw what I did, and she goes, "Just as long as you credit me." She goes, "I've put a lot of work into this," and I totally get it. I mean,
Yeah.
my running my little Austen empire is a lot of work, and collecting these dates of when specific things happen. A lot of it is happenstance. A lot of it is me researching it. But, kind of tying in with our conversation, I think readers, whether or not they're Janites or beginning Janites or what have you, really do like this information because it gives them a connection to Austen's work that the book doesn't give them. Like knowing history on how engagements were done during the Regency
Hmm.
era, that's new knowledge. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like this information. I just assume others like it too.
No, that's the whole CraftLit gig. It's the same thing. In fact, next time you do posts on anything, especially Austen or Bronte, make sure that you give me the link in advance of it going out so I can pimp it out in the CraftLit world too. Because my people would definitely love to read what you're reading if they're not already on your reading list.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I'd want to promote, um, excessively diverting is on Linktree. So you can find me all across the interwebs via my Linktree. It makes it's all in one place. But the one thing that I would promote is my TikTok where I'm reading Pride and Prejudice because my goal
Oh.
is to read all of Austen's books. And like I said, I'm doing it with commentary and swears. Um, and because it's giving me the opportunity, uh, should be the TikTok icon.
Ooh.
So right next to the YouTube one.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, what do you
Uh-oh.
mean something went wrong?
Oh, it's probably me. Either way, though, I wanted people to see your link tree.
Yeah, so the surprising thing is I only have like 66 followers, but I get nearly 1,000 views when
Nice.
I read a chapter. So I'm like, what the hell is this?
Algorithm working.
Nice.
So that's when Heather emailed us and she's like, yeah, pimp this out on social media. I was like, gotta make a TikTok. I haven't, like I said, life has been lifing the last couple of months, so I haven't been keeping up with my reading. And I'm like, hey, I know I haven't been reading. I'm coming back to that, but if you want to have an in-depth conversation about Emma, come join me on CraftLit. So hopefully some of the viewers tonight are coming across from TikTok or various other socials that I've posted on.
Awesome. That would be excellent. Because it's so hard. I mean, I have the benefit of when people find CraftLit, I've got 18 years of content.
Mhm.
So it's not like anybody has to wait for chapters. Although when we're doing a book live, then they do because I do it serially, like you're doing Pride and Prejudice, or the way Charles Dickens used to publish his books. The every week you get a different chapter, or Alexandre Dumas did the same thing, which is hard for some people, and so they hoard all the episodes. And I'll get all of a sudden this rash of emails or phone messages, and it's like, oh well, people are catching up now. We're at the mid book point, so I know what's going on.
One thing that really kind of annoys me about the serials is Amazon is discontinuing Vila, which was how people were presenting their work in serial format because the idea was, oh, well, Dickens did it and all
Right?
these authors did it and they enjoyed it. And, people like, not everybody wants to binge. And if you read
Yeah.
an entire book, that's essentially binging. And when I found out before I started my smut empire that they're discontinuing Vila, I was like, damn it.
I love it. Oh my goodness, the more I learn about you, the more I like you.
Is it going to live anywhere else? Isn't since it's not going to be on Amazon?
I don't know. Like if you're talking about Vila itself, I have no idea what they're doing. As far as my work goes, the smut um hasn't been published yet. Interestingly enough, I have not written a single piece of Austen paraliterature or anything inspired by her. It was kind of like the whole Austen tattoo situation. I've been getting tattoos for about 20, 25 years now. I'm old. Um, and I finally got my Austen tattoo this past summer, and I had a lot of friends who were shocked. They were like, why have you not gotten an Austen tattoo? And like, I have no idea. I don't know. It's hard because she has so many great quotes.
Yeah, it's true.
So
That is true. I am looking up to see. No, I'm not gonna. Um, One of the other comments that I got, I'm looking for it. Um, Again, talking about nuance and how it's easy for people to miss some of the things that probably would have been, if not important to people in Jane Austen's time, at least recognized in Jane Austen's time. We got an email recently from an anonymous listener who said, "I've really enjoyed listening to Emma. I read it years ago and I thought I knew the book, but I was wrong. There's only one comment. Robert Martin and Mr. Elton are turned down when they propose, both of them. But Mr. Elton tries to put Emma down after it. We never hear Robert Martin behaving poorly. It points out who the true gentleman really is." And then she adds at the end, "Can you just imagine Mr. Elton's face at the wedding?" And I was thinking, no, I can't, but boy, do I wish I could go back in time to see it.
Mr. Elton is an incel.
Oh
I'm
my God,
convinced.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
He is a not all men man. So, and I
Yes.
think contemporary people reading that are going to immediately pick up on that.
Yes.
Speaking of nuance, we're going to see a lot of reflection of how we perceive ourselves in society today, which again just rolls back into what makes Austen timeless. I mean,
Exactly. Exactly. In
Well,
fact, keep talking, Becca. I'm going to share something else, and it's going to take me a sec to pull it up.
I was really only just saying people are people, and we like to think that we have changed so much over the decades or centuries, but essentially we are the same, even if society changes around us.
That is
agreed.
definitely true. All right. This is a section of the video where they well, there's an Irish writer who makes a comment that I just can't not share. But then it's the dinner party conversation that everybody, who would they invite? So let's see. All right.
It's always an interesting kind of eavesdropping that we experience when we read the letters of a great figure like Jane Austen.
If you said you were going off for the weekend and you're doing nothing except, rereading Emma or taking Mansfield Park to bed, that image for me would be one of pure happiness. I mean, you could bring maybe a person to bed and that might be nicer in some way, but it wouldn't be as fully satisfying. If I were giving a dinner party and Austen was coming, I'd put Freud on one side of her and Young on the other.
And I would want to include Mary Wollstonecraft.
I'd like to hear her and Charlotte Bronte talk about things.
If I had Jane Austen to dinner, I wouldn't invite anyone else.
Emily Dickinson. She didn't go out so much, but let's say that she did.
There's only one figure who would, I think, treat her in the way in which she deserved, and that's my dear Anton Chekhov.
And I would really lock them there for the evening, and I'd feed them quite a lot of alcohol. It'd be very interesting to know what Austen would make of Freud as she discovered slowly what Freud actually was proposing.
Just
Well,
That's a quote.
Austen did brew beer, so
By the way, the quote
mean-
that's still on the screen is of all the great writers, she is the most difficult to catch in the act of greatness, and that's from Virginia Woolf.
Hmm.
She makes it look easy, and people
I
have,
thought Wolf was not a fan. I thought she and Twain were both of the same.
apparently, I
fans.
haven't read a whole lot on Virginia Woolf except for knowing about this quote, but I do know that there's some conversation about the Twain thing, whether or not that was him trying to needle a friend of his who was a huge Jane Austen fan, who wrote, I think he was the guy who started the Atlantic Monthly, and that was Twain just trying to get his goat. And so but those letters wound up getting published, and people paid more attention to Twain's than to the conversation. Whether
Okay.
that's true or
Yeah.
not, I don't know. But it broke my heart to
Conversation
think.
between the conversation between Charlotte Bronte and Austen
Right.
would be amazing. Like
Oh
I
my
would want to
God.
be a fly on the wall with my cup of cider, hard cider.
Yes,
and,
thank you. Strongbow.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm a snob. We only do local cider. I'm in apple country, so
You're lucky. I have
Um,
one Pennsylvania down east cider that I have access to, but everything else I have to Meh. And that's on
No,
draft.
there's several for my birthday a couple years ago, we did a cidery tour.
Mm.
And one of my favorite cideries makes a cherry apple cider that my husband and I buy by the case. So I might crack one open tonight, I think. Anyways,
Celebrate.
yeah, Bronte and Austen would just be um, I think the when I collate my content um for my social media for it's supposed to be Austen and Bronte. But the problem is the Brontes themselves, despite their own genius, are not as I want to say well endowed, but that's not what I'm looking for. Are as well thought of in terms of their stories as Austen is. Um, and they thought, Austen was just romantic fluff. I mean,
Yeah.
they just were not a fan of her. And it's interesting because I really hate Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. I recently reread a telling of Jane Eyre from the point of view of Bertha. And so I'm like, Mr. Rochester can go rot in hell. So I don't understand why Jane is all about the Mr. Rochester business. Um, and I
Oh,
think it's the
Bronte
most better
heroes.
served. Yeah, I mean, but I still, it's kind of like my thought process on Tolkien. I think he's a shit writer. I can't stand 30 pages of and we're walking and we're walking and we're walking. But I have to give him massive props for what he's done. I mean, he's the
Yeah.
father of contemporary fantasy. I mean, I'm not going to deny the man those accolades. And I mean, he created languages. He was a linguist for fuck's sake. So,
Yeah.
and so the same thing with the Brontes. I think they're wholly underappreciated, even though if their work drives me crazy.
I have to read this other quote to you from one of our listeners. Christine sent this in. She she writes, a family friend recently took Jane Eyre in his homeschool high school tutorial. He decided to tease his classmates each week about all the ways that they did not, in fact, want to date Mr. Rochester in real life. I
Oh,
guess
I love it.
friends don't let friends date Byronic boyfriends.
I
Okay,
love it.
I have to plug
Do it.
another YouTuber. She hasn't been posting lately, but she's got all her stuff still up. Amrita by the book. Um, on YouTube, she did a series of, I think she called them Bad News Lovers, where she talked about like classical romantic heroes like Mr. Darcy and Mr. Rochester and why you really don't want to date them.
Excellent.
Love it.
And like
Love it.
Lincoln.
so
Lincoln out.
delightful. Like you gotta read it or watch it.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll be posting out to that from the show notes down below.
Love it.
That
Absolutely
needs
love
to
it.
happen. Needs to happen. Yeah, I
And
think
I'm a big fan of the Byronic hero myself. I
but
don't know,
not
I
as
like bad
not as a
boys.
date
No,
or not as not as a permanent partnership.
Maybe he's a one night stand.
well,
Oh, hell yes.
yeah, he's a total fuckboy. I mean,
That's the thing.
he's
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Wouldn't kick
Heather,
him
I
out of
hope you
bed.
don't mind. I'm dropping the F-bomb over here. You can totally edit me out.
I have
Um,
I have a sign that somebody that a listener Anne made me that says I swear like a well-educated sailor. So,
yeah, pretty much. Um, but yeah. Oh, there's I'll have to look it up. And I'll do this right now while I'm running my mouth. There's a mystery series where Jane Austen is a vampire,
oh.
and there's only 3 books. Where is it?
And this is not the
Um,
new Pride and Prejudice in space because I agree with you about zombies. I'm not sure about the space one.
no, no, I did see that. I did see that. The author is Michael Thomas Ford.
Okay.
And I think the first book in the series is called Jane Bites Back. And she's Jane Austen. But in this book, she's known as Jane Fairfax because she actually owns a bookstore in upstate New York. And so all these various literary characters kind of come in and out of her life because they're the undead. And that includes Jane and Jane herself. And Byron has been essentially lusting after her for 200 years, and she keeps turning him down.
Just
The really
teasing.
sad part is the books are really well written, but there's only three of them, and I was very disappointed after I mainlined all three, and then I found out that there was no more, and I was like, oh, that's a bummer. This would have been a great series. I would have totally. I just para, Austen paraliterature is hit or miss. There's a lot of people who write it who probably should stick to a Wattpad, um, but don't. And there's others who just knock it out of the park. And when there's, like I mentioned earlier, Curtis Sittenfeld's um, retelling of Pride and Prejudice in contemporary era, where Lizzie and Darcy are having hate sex, is fantastic. I like Curtis's work, as well, on its own, but you know, it's sometimes the work is fantastic, and other times you're like,
Yeah. I just got an email or voicemail today right before I got on the call from Tammy, and she called in to say before the live stream that she just saw a book pop up on her, I think it was her Libby app. It's just come out. It's a 2024 book by Vanessa Kelly called Murder in Highbury. And I can't tell if it's a cozy mystery or if it's just a murder mystery, but it picks up where Emma left off. And before I forget, I think somebody needs to check me on this. I think the actor who plays Knightley up against Anya Taylor-Joy
Mhm.
is actually 36. Because I saw the two of them interviewed together over and over again, and he is quite definitely, I mean, because it's cute, they're probably playing up the fact that their age is separate, but they're basically the correct ages,
Mhm.
which blew my
okay,
mind
so
because he seems way younger than like Colin Firth or anybody else. But
Yeah.
I was shocked. So somebody
Jennifer
needs to
Ely
check me on that.
Jennifer Ely and Colin Firth were actually very close in age,
Mhm.
whereas I think Jane is what, 1 in 20 or 2 in 20.
Emma's
Or I mean
almost
Lizzie.
21.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think Lizzie is like 1 in 20 or 2 in 20. But yes, to answer your question, Heather, Murder in Highbury, Vanessa Kelly, it is a mystery series.
A
Picking
series.
picking up, like you had said, after at the end of Emma. And she becomes going from clever matchmaker to Regency England's shrewdest, excuse me, shrewdest sleuth. So
Interesting. So she's Miss
I will.
Marple in On Pure Waste.
I actually do have on Libby. You can tag books, specific tags, and I do have an Austen tag, so I will add that to that tag
Excellent.
to read at
Excellent.
another time.
Yeah, and I'll put all of these in the description box below.
Yeah. And for anyone interested in Austen paraliterature, Austen Prose is a really great, I think she has a website, and also she's on Goodreads. So I follow on Goodreads, and I'm always seeing like want to read, just finished, like all these books related to Austen, based on Austen. So that's why I recognize a lot of these titles. I'm just like, oh yeah, Laurel read that.
Yeah, I have every book that I read that's either Austen or somehow related to Austen, whether it's a retelling, inspiration, or whatever, is on my Goodreads as Austen-esque.
Mhm.
Um, just so that I have a terrible habit of checking out books I've already read, so I need to cross-reference my Goodreads more often.
Yeah.
I just read 84 Tarn Cross Road, which I actually turned out I read earlier last year, and I read so much that I completely forgot. I was like, Dad, this book sounds familiar.
How did
Why
you
is
like
that
it?
all you? It
How'd you like it
was
again?
fine. It was fine. I don't know. I have my general, there's, as far as my reading habits go, I tend to, on Goodreads, I tend to rate fours and fives, depending upon the book itself. If it's fine, it gets a 3. If it's really good enough that I'm going to want to continue on with the series or maybe read more by the author, it gets a 4. It gets a 5. It's like, chef's
Yeah.
kiss.
Like
Yeah.
if it's fine, it spoke to my soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. It transcends something important. I agree with that. It's the same way I feel about scoring and rating movies and TV shows too. It's like my first question is, could I tell what they were trying to do? And if I could, did they accomplish it?
Yes.
Speaking of which, thoughts on Netflix rebooting Pride and Prejudice.
What?
Again?
You haven't heard this?
No.
Oh my gosh, this just came out
I
within the
may
last
have, but
couple
I
weeks.
also I get tired. Okay. I love Jane Austen and I love a Jane Austen adaptation, but I am so tired. I'm like, there are so many other great books to adapt. And a lot of times they will do a Jane Austen book when I'm like, you clearly want to be doing this book.
Yeah.
Why not just do that book? But Austen's name is so well recognized that it's like, well, we'll just redo Austen, or even publishers will be like, well, we'll make this author do an Austen book. And it's like, there are other stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, Netflix is rebooting Pride and Prejudice. It's going to be a mini series.
Oh my God.
It is being written by, I can see her name. She's a British author. So hopefully there'll be some more British isms
That's at
to
least
it.
that's something.
No idea if it's going to be period or contemporary.
Right.
I get excited.
I'm happy
because
for enjoy it.
I get excited because I'm always curious to see how bad they're gonna mangle it. So and then I can run my mouth about it on social media. And you know, so that's, when I went and saw Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, I was the only one in the theater. I went opening day. I was the only one in the theater. I'm quite proud of that, by the way.
I had the opposite
Should be.
experience. I actually got to see a preview screening when I was in college. It was a packed house, and everyone was just having the time of their life. It's
Oh,
the best theater
lovely.
experience I've ever had.
Good. Aiden
Oh,
Aiden
lovely.
loved Pride and Prejudice and Zombies,
Yeah.
the movie. And I had already read most of the book. I think I got to the point where I was like, yeah, I have a feeling I know where this is going. So,
Book was shit.
but
The,
the
That's
movie,
the movie was a ton of fun.
yes.
The book was shit. I read it and I was like, okay, so essentially Seth Graham just cut and pasted Pride and Prejudice. He went to
Yes.
Gutenberg, cut
And then
pasted
added the
Pride
word
and Prejudice.
zombie.
Yeah, and added the word zombie. And I'm like, this is shit. And
Yep.
Quirk Books published it. And so why am I not making millions?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that was my
I agree.
that
I agree.
was
But the
my thing.
casting in the movie,
Mhm.
so dead on. I had
Agreed.
really wished to see that cast do a straight up version of Pride and Prejudice as well, because I really, really liked who they got and where they put them in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I don't remember any other details about the book or about the movie, except that I really enjoyed it and I thought the cast was spectacular. But I remember no
Yeah.
other details except for some ass kicking fights, which I thought were,
Yeah.
awesome.
Lizzie and her sisters kicking ass and
Yeah.
taking names it's pretty
Oh, and
fantastic.
the big showdown between Lizzie and Lady Catherine de Bourgh is just like, I'm not a big fan of making the subtext text, but that was awesome.
Yeah. That's a good place to do it.
Yes.
That's like reposting all the Dracula episodes and listening to many of them. It's another thing like with Jane Austen, just almost 100 years later, that there's so much modernity just in general in Dracula. And Bram Stoker was an outsider, Irishman, basically passing as a British man in London. And I think that helps make his stuff timeless. Jane Austen, I think all the women writers are outsiders from the main societal construct, and that gives them an interesting take, a useful to read take on society as well.
Here's a question for both of you. I'm a big romance reader. I write romance. the world fucking sucks, and I don't want to read.
Mm-mm.
I don't want to read something unless there's some kind of happiness in the
Mm-mm.
book.
Same.
That may change. I read cross genres, but I tend to, anyways. So Austen is considered to be a the grandmother, godmother of romance. She pretty much gave Georgette Eyre for her career.
Who I love.
But I have read in the past that Austen is not a romance novelist because of the themes and the context, and her stories in general produce so much more. So, what hill
Wow.
are you standing on? Do you think romance?
I'm
Do you think?
letting Rebecca's taken this. She
I
is the
have a whole
expert.
spiel on this. Okay,
Yay!
I totally agree that Austen is the godmother of romance. Like, we draw so many of our tropes from Pride and Prejudice specifically. Now, whether those tropes are used in a way that is actually in line with how Austen wrote it, whole other subject. But I think she writes really good romances in her books, but her books are not romance. One, because the genre was not there yet in the way that we think of the romance genre now, but also because it does have other things. So for me, the difference is that a romance genre book is a book that is primarily concerned with the romance. That is the heart of the whole thing. That is the end all be all. That's what the plot is about. There can be other things for sure. And I've read some great romance novels that deal with all sorts of wonderful topics, but the main thrust of it, sorry, is yeah, the main thrust of it is the romance. And the romance has the main thrust. But with Jane Austen, the romance is part of it. The romance is part of the plot for sure, but it is not the main thing. It's not the be all end all. It's, in a lot of ways, it's a plot device for exploring all these ideas about family and society and education and different philosophical views like sense and sensibility, which really I don't think can be considered a romance because the male heroes don't have a lot of page time, you know, when you really think about it,
Not a
particularly
lot there.
Edward Ferrars. So she's using these romantic plots to tell different stories and to further all these other ideas. So the romance is in service to other things, whereas in a romance novel, everything else is often in service to the romance. What do you think? You can disagree. I love it. I love a good book debate. Let's do it.
Okay, so I agree with you that Austen brings a lot to the novel, and that romance aspect of it is a plot device. I agree with that. However, we would typically call, I hate this phrase, but it's the way books are generalized. We would possibly call Austen's books women's fiction because her books deal with so much more than just romance. But, and this is the big but, each of her novels have a happily ever after, and that is the crux of romance. Is regardless of what you're writing about, as long as there's a romantic element and there's a conflict between the hero and heroine that gets resolved and it ends in a happily ever after, it's a romance.
Okay, I want to read something to you because this puts a different question in the middle of this, and I think what you guys are saying, both of you, is really interesting. This is again from the from Irina, who wrote in about the feminist leanings of Jane Austen's novels. She wrote, "Finally, I am wondering if in Emma, Jane Austen shows us her ideal for a female life and a destiny. She does not make Emma perfect, but she allows her to be free and independent and intelligent and respected, everything most women don't really have at that time and age. The focus of the book is mostly on Emma's growth as a person, from the moment she steps into a bigger world, as her brother-in-law states at some point. In fact, Emma's love story is not that important, and even if it were removed, I don't think it would spoil anything for the readers, although I do like happy endings, so I'm really glad it's there. And I thought
I think
this
she's
is the one Jane Austen book that I would say doesn't need a happy ending. The same, I mean, and the marriage happy ending. Like I wanted it in Pride and Prejudice and in Persuasion.
I think Persuasion is, if any of her books can be classified as just a straight up romance novel, I think it's Persuasion.
Yeah. Because that really
and
does,
you-
everything hinges on them getting together for realsies.
yeah, and the thing is that Persuasion is probably one of my favorite Austen books. But I'll freely admit, Anne Elliot does not have a spine. But her growth as a character and her steadfastness and her love for Wentworth is what does it for me. And she gets a spine later on.
I think she's got a spine. I think it's a very gentle spine. Like she's not the obstinate, headstrong girl that Lizzie
No,
are.
oh
She's
no,
not out to like
no.
make waves. But when something really matters to her, and when she has a well-reasoned logic for it, she can be very steadfast. So, little things like saying goodbye to the people in the parish, it was kind of thrust upon her because nobody else wanted to do it, but that was something that she recognized as important. She did try to exert some influence over her father and sister to kind of economize and draw back a little bit. She just wasn't loud or brash about it. And I think a lot of the feeling that she is spineless comes from her breaking the engagement the first time around, which I totally get because it's just like, girl, run away. Your family sucks. This guy is great. It's going to be fine. And I totally believe, like with all my heart, that if they had married back then, they would have been fine. They would have had a good life. It would have been difficult in many ways, but they would have come through fine and they would have grown together. But, sorry, I don't, like, I get the reasoning. And this is something that, Austen writes about in the last few chapters. So, like, even Anne feels that she still made a well-reasoned choice in the, sorry, it's a little hot in here, a pretty good choice, which was to recognize that she was very young and she was very sheltered, and to listen to the advice of the people she trusted. So I honestly don't think that it was her dad's disapproval that did anything. It was Lady Russell's. And Lady Russell was from her mom, basically. She was her mother figure for many, many years. And she, with her life experience, didn't have a good reason to doubt Lady Russell, and what she was telling her was best for her. So, it caused a lot of hurt for her and for Captain Wentworth. And I think there are regrets, but also I don't think it was a spineless or bad decision. It was her trying to do the right thing and trying to listen to someone who is important to her. And also just, it shows how important those ties are to her. Because even if they had gotten married and they'd been fine and they'd been happy together, it would have hurt her relationships with the people who did matter. And that was something that at that time was very difficult for her to give up. So I don't think she was spineless, but I think we can say she was misguided.
But I don't like having nuanced and reasonable arguments thrown at me. It makes me anxious.
I know. Stop hurting me with facts.
Yeah. Well, not facts, opinions.
Nuance.
It is nuanced, and
It is.
I think it is very nuanced. And yeah, Lady Russell totally did Anne a dirty. There's no doubt about it. Her father and sisters did not help. Maybe that's ultimately what I'm referring to about having a spine, is that she found it incredibly difficult to stand up to her father, her sisters, and but Lady Russell was going to argue probably more important to her than her family, just because of the influence that Lady Russell has given her. We do see later on that Lady Russell is contrite about how she handled it. Um, but I think again, a lot of it had to do with the fact that here comes Captain Wentworth, and he
Oh
is
yeah.
making the money,
Oh
and
yeah.
he is
Yes.
100%,
But that's Lady Russell. That's not Anne's opinion changing. It's just Anne.
No,
Yeah.
no, and Anne still sees Lady Russell as the mother figure she does not have, regardless if
And she
what.
loved Wentworth when he was poor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like the money doesn't make a difference to Anne, but it does make a difference to how well he can fit into her life and her existing relationships.
I also
yeah,
think
that's
that
fair.
it would have been, especially looking at the fiscal relationship between um, women and their future, that until Anne Elliot is married, she is completely dependent on her family. And so there's a real, we talk about the different agency that you've got with the Knightley Emma relationship, just because he's so much older and she's so much younger. But there's that same and to me that's like the professor student master slave relationship, there's a power dynamic there that people are not talking about and really should. It seems to me that the power dynamic in Persuasion is, I can't leave my father's house. I can't risk getting kicked out of my father's house. So my father becomes a tyrant and I have to make myself miserable, just because what are my other choices if I don't have a husband? And that kind of societal restriction that gets placed on women, especially at this time period, it's easier to see when you're talking about slavery, especially chattel slavery in the United States. It's so stark and so wrong. And to a greater or lesser degree, women have been in that situation all women have been in that situation for a really long time.
Oh yeah, we're still in it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I
Well,
mean,
we're
women
certainly
didn't
heading
get.
back into it
Hi, I'm in
hardcore.
Texas.
And you're in
Yeah.
Texas. Yay.
Hey,
You can come
man, I
visit.
used to live in Kentucky, so I feel you. But yeah, I mean, women, thankfully, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, fought for the right to women to get credit cards, and
Amen, sister.
in the 1970s,
In
and
my lifetime.
same thing with getting mortgages, not until the mid 70s. I mean, it's just insane. Um, what, and women of color didn't get the right to vote to the 60s. I mean, sorry, I get really fired up about this topic.
No, we're
No,
right there with you.
it's
Like,
yeah,
go on.
it's part of Jane Austen's world too, because
Yeah, it absolutely is.
these kinds of rights were important.
And I think that's with Emma, she's showcasing this is what it could look like when you have a woman with autonomy
Mhm.
and authority over her own
Mhm.
personhood.
Yeah.
And
She
I
may
think,
choose the guy at the end, but she doesn't need to choose the guy at
right,
the end.
exactly. Um, yeah,
It's an important distinction.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I
I
think
all this
keep going.
all this kind of goes back to something we've touched upon throughout the discussion of how much of a disservice we do, not just to Austen, but to our own reading when we flatten things in Austen, and when we, divorce it from the context, or we just focus on the age difference between Emma and Knightley instead of how that relationship actually plays out on the page. We deprive ourselves of these challenges to our thinking and to our understanding of the world. And, it's very easy to look at Knightley and Emma and be like, ooh, he's 16 years older than her. Gross. She was a baby when he was a teenager and he's known her the whole time. But, if you read it, you're like, well, this is actually a very healthy relationship. And every step of the way, he is just acting as a friend to her. And he never tries to influence her, in service to his own desire, but just in trying to be a good friend and help her be the best person she can be, whether that's with him, with someone else, without anybody. And also, like with Anne Elliot, it's really, really tempting to say she has no spine. this girl just can't stand up for herself. But, you know, which I totally get. It's very tempting because we like things to be simple. We like black and white. But Jane Austen writes in a very shades of gray world. And I think when we're reading those things and we have to stop and be like, okay, is she spineless? Did she make a really bad decision? Did she make a decision that seemed right at the time, but turned out to cause a lot of needless hurt because they would have been okay? Or, you know, all these things. We're not just learning about the characters in their world, but we're learning about humanity, and we're learning about the complexity of life and figuring out what is important to us.
And I think that's why you can reread Austen over and over and over again. Is I read it for the romance sometimes, and that's it. And sometimes I read it because I want to take a look at deeper things and see how Jane Austen dealt with it. But I think both of the books that we focused on the most couldn't have been written by young Jane. Like Lady Susan started as young Jane, and even though she revised it later, stayed as young Jane. But Emma and Persuasion really.
Yes.
And Mansfield Park is a didactic novel. I don't put that in with anybody else or any of the other books. But these two seem to me to be books written by grown-up person who had history to look back on, personal history to look back on.
Thinking about gray areas and how things were at the time, here is a decisive commentary. The song Baby It's Cold Outside.
Oh yeah. Oh
You
my goodness.
bringing things up for me.
All right. Let me
Trigger
rub my
warning.
little hands
Go for
together.
it.
Yeah. Contemporary look at it. It is a gaslighting, grooming, all the isms you can think of, that if this was going on in 2024 America, we would be like getting the fuck away from this guy. But song came out in a period where women's autonomy, what she's doing, it's not that he's grooming her or gaslighting her. It's she's essentially rejecting the patriarchy and the idea of what she, what women of her age are supposed to do. Like, no, you are not allowed to be alone with a man. And she's like saying, yes, I am. I am making this choice to be here. I am trepidatious because if I leave or stay longer, this is going to be what is thought of me or seen of me.
Yeah.
And when I saw that argument, I was like, hot damn, I agree with that. And this is a song that if you bring this up even today, there's a lot of people with blinders on who do not take that nuance into effect. Gone with the Wind is another very nuanced book and movie that I have a very complicated relationship with. But, Becca kind of talked about this when relating to Anne Elliot. It's a gray area. You cannot make a hot decision. You have to really think about what was being said at this time. Now, if your opinion after all this is still what it was when it began, that's exactly what it is. It's an opinion, and I welcome you to it. I'm not, I as I've gotten older, I have tried not to yuck people's yums. Just because why I stand on hills about the 2022 version of Persuasion and the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice. I enjoy it. Devaney Loser supports Persuasion. She is a Jane Austen expert. Who am I to argue with her? Especially the language used in the movie. She came right out and said that a lot of thought processes about words and phrases that weren't used, for example, now we're exes, it totally was used in that time period in that way.
The Tiffany effect.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, I went from Baby It's Cold Outside to defending Persuasion again. But anyways, yes.
It's okay.
So
Explain the Tiffany effect, Becca.
Okay. So the Tiffany effect is basically where Tiffany is a very modern sounding name. And so we, think that it's fairly recent. And if we read the name Tiffany in like a historical fiction novel, you'll immediately be like, oh, no, that's inaccurate. When in fact, it is a very old name that people did have back in the 1800s, the 1700s. So it is something that is historically accurate, that feels anachronistic and will take readers out. So that's the Tiffany effect. Back to Baby It's Cold Outside, though.
Mhm.
Another example of things taken out of context.
Mhm.
So I don't know if y'all know this, the song was written by a husband and wife songwriting team. And apparently they used to host parties at their home. And, it was like the kind of Hollywood party that you think about, where there's like people doing their bits and singing and dancing, all that stuff. And they would sing this song to kind of signal to people like, okay, it's time to go home now. So, but
That's
it's
hilarious.
that context of like, it's kind of driving people out, but it's also the context of this was written by a very loving, married couple, and it's got a little tongue in cheek, and it is meant to be very affectionate. And so if you look at it completely divorced from that, and you just look at,
Just the language.
lyrics from a very modern viewpoint, and people will be like, say what's in this drink line, they're like, oh, it's a roofie, and it's like, no, it's probably just hard liquor. Things like that. Also, it was used in an Esther Williams film with Ricardo Montalban, and
Oh
they
my
did
God.
2 versions, one with Esther and Ricardo, and then one with Red Skelton and I'm blanking on her name, but she's fabulous, Betty Garrett. And they show it in 2 different ways, which is also very interesting to watch, because in one, you've got Ricardo, acting like he's all sly and trying to seduce her, and Esther just being like, bye. And then in the other one, Betty Garrett is just like strongly coming on to poor Red Skelton, who cannot resist. So yeah, context, but also like critical thinking.
There's
I'm
also
a
so many ties to Mary Wollstonecraft, just to bring it back to that, because that is, no matter which way you read it, there are implications in vindications of the rights of women that are definitely showing up in any reading of that song. And I mean, I personally love it. It cracks me up. I think it's hilarious, but I am also 28 years into a very loving relationship with a guy who still loves me. So yay. But we were theater people. So for us, the whole theater thing of that song is what tracks. But yeah, I cut you off, Lisa. What were you saying?
I was just gonna say I'm a big fan of etymology. It's like the only reason why I got a subscription to Oxford English Dictionary
Yep.
was so I could read up etymologies on words. So that was like the best $100 a year that I could spend. But I looked up the name Tiffany. It actually dates back to the 12th century. It comes from Greece. It actually comes from, it's a English version of a Greek name, Theophania. But the modern connotation of it is actually spawned from Breakfast at Tiffany's. So that's where it comes in modernity, but it actually, as Becca has said, it dates back to the 12th century.
I'm going to have to post a CGP Grey video for you guys to watch, because he did, I think he did 2 videos of going down the rabbit hole, researching all the different places that Tiffany's shows up. It's like watching an Oxford English Dictionary etymology party. It's so much fun, and it's animated, which makes it even more fun, because
Oh, lovely.
yeah, no, you will enjoy it. I will post it. It's but it is a problem, and there's a lot of things like, oh my God, when we did Gulliver's Travels, right around the same, because of the zeitgeist, right around the same time that Jack Black's Gulliver's Travels came out, all these critics were criticizing Jack Black person for the scene where he pees on the fire in the castle of the Lilliputians. And they're like, do we really have to be this tacky? Can we please just grow up? And it's like, dude, it's in the book. That is actually in the book. And people don't read books, so
No, absolutely not.
That's what we're here for.
Are they reading the books?
Not
No, the question is, are they reading the original
Oh,
or a
yeah.
translation of it, or are they reading an interpretation
But also,
Or
like, there's
modernization.
the
or
thing,
retelling
like, are
of it?
you reading it? Are you just superficially taking it in, or are you reading it and thinking about it and actually engaging with it? Because I think that's two different levels of reading,
Yeah,
even if it's the same text.
Yeah, I mean,
definitely.
that's 100% true. I mean, you know, in the past when I've read Pride and Prejudice or Persuasion or any of Austen's work, it's always been superficial.
Mhm.
And I'll readily admit that, but reading it chapter by chapter for TikTok, which
Mhm.
is where the commentary came in, you know, I engage with what is being said, and in some cases I have to explain it to the audience because the way that
Mhm.
Austen uses language is not what we would work with, you know, in contemporary times. And that's like right after I got to the chapter where Mr. Bennet is chiding Mrs. Bennet about he's teasing her about going to Netherfield. And the way that Austen sets the scene, it's very clear from the wording that what he says to her, that he's teasing her in a good mannered way, and that he's in love with her, or was once in love with her, and he loved her for her beauty or her looks or whatever the case is. And he was actually, if I remember correctly, because it had been a couple months, she married up into it. And then I read these criticisms that they were an arranged marriage. No, no, no. Austen specifically says that,
She's a
you
tradesman's
know,
daughter.
huh?
Like, sure, her family's in trade.
Yeah,
He's a gentleman. That's marrying up.
yeah, you know, and so it was definitely a love match. And reading the criticism that's saying it isn't, I'm like, you're not reading Austen. I'm sorry, you're reading somebody
Yeah.
else.
I've got to now I've got to play one more link for you, and actually I'm totally blowing it because I was going to use this in when I read you Pride and Prejudice, but this is a setup from I don't know how many years ago. This was like 10 years ago. I can't remember. Um, in England, the setup is Jane Austen versus Charlotte Bronte. Or no, all the Brontes, because Emily and all come in. So the guy who's setting up Jane Austen, they have actors on stage to portray the texts. And I played a chunk of Emma that was done here, the Emma with Mr. Elton finally confessing, and it is so brilliantly done that it changed my entire view of how that scene works. So he does the same thing here, but with Pride and Prejudice. And what he does is he brings out the first part of the first chapter minus the opening line. Because we get so used to the opening line, you know, it is a universal, the whole thing. Don't pay attention to that. Instead, if you pay attention to what they're saying to each other, you get a whole different read on Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. And I am totally excited to be able to show this to you guys. I'm just so excited. All right.
My dear Mr. Bennet, said his lady to him one day, have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last? Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. But it is, returned she. For Mrs. Long has just been here and she has told me all about it. Mr. Bennet made no answer. But do you not want to know who has taken it? Cried his wife impatiently.
You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it.
This was invitation enough.
Why, my dear, you must know Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is to be taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England, and that he came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place, and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Norris immediately that he is to take possession before Michaelmas, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of the week.
What's his name?
Bingley.
Is he married or single?
Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls.
How so? How can it affect them?
My dear Mr. Bennet, how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I'm thinking of him as marrying one of them.
Is that his design in settling here?
How can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes.
Oh, I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go. Or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps would be still better, for as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley may like you the best of the party.
My dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty. But I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty.
In such cases, a woman has not often much beauty to think of.
But, my dear, you must indeed go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes into the neighbourhood.
It's more than I engaged for, I assure you.
But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go merely on that account, for in general, you know, they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go, for it would be impossible for us to visit him if you do not.
Oh, you're over-scrupulous, surely. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls. Though I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie.
I desire you will do no such thing. Lizzie is not a bit better than the others. I am sure she is not half so handsome as Jane, nor half so good-humoured as Lydia, but you're always giving her the preference.
Well, they've none of them much to recommend them. They're all silly and ignorant like other girls, but Lizzie has something more of quickness than her sister.
Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion for my poor nerves.
Oh, you mistake me, my dear. I have a very high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these last 20 years at least.
Ah, you do not know what I suffer.
But I hope you will get over it and live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighbourhood.
It will be of no use to us if 20 such should come, since you will not visit them.
Oh, depend upon it, my dear, that when there are 20, I will visit them all.
Mr. Bennet was so odd a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humour, reserve and caprice, that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was less difficult to develop. She was a woman of mean understanding, little information, and uncertain temper. When she was discontented, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its solace was visiting and news.
I think part of it is just having the audience there and getting to hear where they're laughing. But I'd never heard that text that way before, where exactly what you were saying before, Lisa, that they really are in love. Mm-hmm. And that changes so much about what comes next.
And that, I will say, is one thing I really like about the 2005 version is it's, I think, the only adaptation I've seen that shows that affection between them.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'll admit that's where I'm influenced by it. But the other thing too, as far as nuance goes, with Mrs. Bennet, I mean, she knows. She knows exactly what's going to happen.
Oh yeah.
The estate is entailed. Every son has died.
They're screwed.
Yeah, they're absolutely fucking screwed. And
yep.
If one of the girls has to get married, at least one, yes, to be able to provide. I mean, Jane lived this. I mean, she and Cassandra shuffled off, especially when Reverend Austen died, she and Cassandra and their mother shuffled off everywhere.
Yeah, they had 8 years of no idea what. Yeah,
and I mean, it's just, and I think Mrs. Bennet gets a bad rap, and it goes back to nuance in the time period, and she's I feel for her, and Brenda Blythen's portrayal of her, it's just, I love it. Love it, love it, love it. I love that, what you just given us. I think that was fantastic. And the other thing too, as far as nuance goes, I mean, we hear 10,000 pounds, and I think modern minds are like, that's it, like that's nothing. Yeah, that's one of the things I talk about when I read. Yeah, when I read Pride and Prejudice on TikTok, I give commentary like, okay, so 10,000 pounds a year is actually over 100,000 American dollars a year now. And and this is not talking about his holdings, this is his income.
Yeah.
And you can
this
live
is not
very
touching the
comfortably.
principal. Yep.
Right. You can live very comfortably on $100,000 a year, which seems awful to say because we shouldn't need to make that much money to live comfortably. But um, and the same for Bingley. I mean, he's coming in around 50, 60,000. And I think it's important to understand that context when you're talking about what Austen is saying at that time. I think nuance is our word for this podcast because we keep using it a lot.
Yep.
But it's true. It's absolutely 100% true.
Well, they are the one, even 100,000 sounds small right now, but they are the 1%. There were no billionaires
Mhm.
that you had to go up against, except, and even the royals didn't have that much money. These guys are the 1%. And
Mm.
I got it wrong with Emma early on, and I got corrected by several different people that Emma's fortune is 20,000 pounds, but that's her entire fortune. That's her investments, which
Mhm.
for women had to be counted out and identifiable. Whereas with guys, because the principal is usually land and investments, it's a squishier number, which is why it can change. And knowing kind of the range that they're in is what matters, because that principle could change,
Excuse me.
but you are paying attention to how much they're going to make every year off, basically off the interest.
Right.
What were you going to say, Becca?
Just going back to the Bennets and nuance. It's been so interesting to watch this conversation evolve over the years. Because, for a very long time, all I was hearing is just like mockery of Mrs. Bennet. And oh, she's the worst, and she's so silly. All she cares about is marriage. And in the past few years, there's been this conversational shift to no, she has very valid concerns about her children and her own welfare after he dies. And these are very practical reasons. And I'm really interested to see when we get to the really nuanced point, which is kind of in between, which is like, yes, she has very practical concerns and she's right to be anxious about this. That is not what Austen is criticizing. Austen is criticizing the kind of gauche manner in which she expresses that concern and goes about trying to find some safety for herself and her children. It's fine that she wants them to marry comfortably and well.
Expected.
Yeah, that's good. It's not okay that she is so tacky about it.
Yeah.
And so forward and so loud in, talking about it with everybody, where anybody, including Mr. Darcy, can hear. It's the manner in which she expresses her concerns and tries to fix it that is the problem, both because it's kind of tacky and also because that does in this society materially hurt her daughter's chances as well. Because the whole thing about marriage and trying to find one at that time is it's important for women to get married, and everybody knows that, but you're not supposed to want to get married just for money. You're supposed to want the love marriage, and you're supposed to, conduct yourself in a way where, you're not telling people you're marrying for security and money, so it's fine to want those things, but there's this fine line between wanting that and letting people see that you're just after money.
Well, and isn't it Miss Bingley in Pride and Prejudice who says at one of the parties out loud where Elizabeth can hear, but says it to Darcy, how much fun you would have with her as your mother-in-law, I think. And that's like the one window that you get into, okay, I'm not imagining how kind of loud and pushy she is. That is her presentation outside of the home.
Yeah.
But I agree that I when I was teaching high school in New York City, often with these books or with even with Scarlet Letter, I had kids who claimed, she's just a gold digger. Hester got caught, but really she was just a gold digger. She was just trying to get a guy by sleeping with him, and that's all there was to it. And by the end, I mean, they recognized what was really going on. But that's a hard explanation to make when, as Mary Wollstonecraft says, the training that women go through to be the nice girls and follow all the rules and all of those things is subtext for the guys. They're in power. They don't need to see what's happening, but the women sure know. And all of my professors of Jane Austen prior to doing CraftLit had been men. So I had a lot to learn. Which, by the way, the one guy who I would say really gets it, because he makes lovely, lovely comments about Charlotte in Pride and Prejudice, but it's John. Whoops. This is John Mullen. John Mullen, who was the guy who set up and made the argument pro Jane in that Jane Austen versus Emily Bronte series.
Just so you know, Heather, I do have the Vindication of the Rights of Women on Kindle that I probably downloaded 100 million years ago.
Yep.
And all our conversations today, I will probably read it.
I've posted the first part of the introduction, and tomorrow we should get the second part of the introduction.
And I'm also curious, do you read nonfiction as part of CraftLit? I'm very new to your podcast.
I have to read a lot of nonfiction. I've got 3 more. A lot of nonfiction about the books that we're going to do to be able to make sure I'm not missing anything, because I have a lot of listeners who have read these books many, many times and have done research themselves. And so if I miss something, they will write in and tell me, which is great. But this year, Emma has been particularly hard because I got long COVID, and reading at all right now, but especially reading nonfiction and tracking it has been a real challenge. So these books, some of them are not read all the way.
The reason why I asked is if you want to read nonfiction for fun, I'm reading Shakespeare's Sisters.
Yeah, my husband read that.
By Rami Targov. And yeah, it's I love it. So far what I've read of it, I haven't read that much, but what I've read, I think it's a fantastic vehicle for discussions, because there's all these women writers who are writing in the Renaissance era that, even our contemporaries like Austen kind of, I don't want to say forget, but these women are so overlooked that it's difficult to see their influence, even though it does exist.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and that we've been on here for a little bit. I am going to say, Becca, did you have any final things to say? Because I think I've gotten all the links and everything. I love Emma. I promised everybody that at the end of this live stream, I was going to announce the next book. So I will tell you what's happened. I got a fabulous actor who can do all the voices to agree to read Moby Dick out loud for us, because it's the one book that people keep asking for, along with Middlemarch, which that's a different problem, and it is being recorded, but it's just going to take years.
Would you call it your white whale?
I would call it my white whale indeed. I see what you did there. Yes, and so I got him to agree to read all the fun chapters, the story plot chapters, and I would read all of the boring whaling chapters, the ambergris chapters and everything, so that he could just, it's like Princess Bride, just the fun parts version. This week has not done good things to lots and lots of people, and his family is one of them right now. So we are on hold with Moby Dick. At some point it will happen, but I have 2 different books that I just found this out before we got on the live stream. I have 2 different books that I'm putting on deck, and I may wind up doing all of them at some point. Finishing Vindication of the Rights of Women, redoing the Pride and Prejudice, Cranford, the one book it's Elizabeth Gaskell, it's episodic-ish, it's light, it's not north and south, and it's just people getting along. It seems like maybe the right thing to do right now. But the other thing that I'm going to be doing interspersed with all of that is some Kafka, because nobody reads Kafka anymore, and I think being able to have to see how somebody wrote when language stopped meaning what language means is important.
I think it's interesting you didn't choose you didn't choose Charlotte Bronte because Gaskell wrote her biography.
Oh, we already did Jane Eyre, and I haven't done we did Tenant of Whitefell Hall, we did Jane Eyre, we did Wuthering Heights as a premium book because people would have stopped listening to the podcast if that had been the main book, and told me that out loud. But there's a Bronte sister biography, actually all four Brontes, that if you haven't read it before, it's called Wild Genius on the Moor. I think it's Judith Butler. And when you talk about nonfiction, that is a page turner. It's incredible. And she digs into research that Elizabeth Gaskell didn't have access to, or did but just ignored. And I love me some Elizabeth Gaskell. We did North and South, and I love that book. But you will love Genius on the Moors. It's spectacular. So that's where I'm at. I think I'm not, if I start a new book in January, it'll probably be Cranford. And that's light and sweet and easy. And
Juliette Barker.
Juliette Barker, thank you. She worked at the Bronte Center. She worked there at the parsonage in England for a while.
The Jane Austen Company, who actually is the spin-off of Jane Austen Summer Program, did a year-long Austen and Bronte comparison, having different speakers come in and talking about topics that had approached both of them. So I'm a terrible fan. I haven't checked those out, but it's been on my to-do list.
Well, now you have a vote for that one. It is an easy read. I was shocked because it is not a thin book. As well, they were prolific in ways that most human people aren't. And it doesn't surprise me that they didn't like Jane Austen, because the rags that they were growing up reading were all the Byronic bodice ripper stories in the magazines that they were getting access to. So for them, this would have been boring.
Like Bronte's versus Austen is very much Eleanor versus Marianne.
Yes.
It's like the passion and the uncontrollable feelings versus reason and constraint and logic and, ooh, maybe this might not turn out well with this toxic man. So which is why I'm always so interested to learn, like, who likes Austen, who likes the Brontes, who likes both of them. There's so many ideological conflicts between the two.
That was one of the reasons why when Kate the librarian said, my friend Lisa does all Austen, all Bronte Substack, maybe she'd come on. I said, yes, because if you love both of those people as writers, then nuance is your middle name. You cannot not see extra in those two people.
I think some people would disagree and say I'm a bull in a china shop.
I think there are people who don't see. Can I say my kind of inflammatory thing?
Do it.
Okay. The 2005 Pride and Prejudice.
Oh God.
I like it as a movie. I don't love it as an adaptation. But the thing that I always say is 2005 Pride and Prejudice is Jane Austen for Bronte lovers.
Oh, I like that. Ooh. I absolutely do like that.
That's mad deep, yo.
Right? It's
okay. So what's the reasoning behind it? What's the reasoning behind it?
Well, just it's so much more about passion than about reason. It's got the mood that you associate with Bronte more than you associate with Austen. Like, you literally have people strolling on the moors, and you have, this very dashing Darcy coming through in his
shirt unbuttoned.
And I'm not going to say I don't like it. I actually am one of the people who really loves Matthew McFadden as Darcy. And like, that's my favorite part of the movie. But it's much more sensibility than sense.
That is a really interesting take. I totally get that. And that's a
And
good
I'm
way
not
to
gonna.
describe how
Great
people
gateway.
respond to a lot of movies, especially movie adaptations. By the way, Lisa, if you haven't seen the podcast, Lost in Adaptation, the YouTube channel, but also there's a different person, a couple that does that Lost in Adaptation on, or no, they do Adapt or Perish, and which is awesome. And so they read all the versions and then watch, and then that's their podcast. So it's like once a month.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, I'm so tired of slamming of the 2005 version that I decided, because I have copious amount of free time, I was going to watch 2005 and talk about it on TikTok. And I was going to compare it. I was going to try and compare it chapter by chapter. And I think, because I wanted, I haven't, I read Austen for enjoyment. I don't read it for the academic aspect of it. But but my remembrance of the book against the movie seemed pretty tightly wound. I didn't really see a lot of, you know, I'm not going to argue and say or disagree and say, yeah, it's not perfect, but neither is 1995.
No, I don't think
Um,
1995 is perfect either.
but
Yeah.
so I'm reading it, and the first 4 chapters are condensed in 4 minutes, I think, if I remember correctly. And it is almost the first, if I remember correctly, the first 4 chapters are condensed in the first 4 minutes of the movie, and it's almost the chapter by chapter adaptation is on par, because you're taking out a lot of dialogue, yes, but the flow of events happens in that time. So I'm curious to see how the rest of it's going to turn out, when I get back to watching it. But yeah, that I guess for final thoughts, if you want to hear commentary and swears on Pride and Prejudice, go to my TikTok.
Excellent.
Love it.
Always a good thing. And I will be pinging you again when I'm done with Vindication, for the CraftLit
Absolutely. This was a lot of fun.
redux.
I didn't realize it was going to be 2.5 hours long. It was a lot of fun.
Neither did I.
I love it. This has
Yep.
been so much fun.
This
And I
was
love
great.
all of the ideas we touched upon. And I also love that you and I have so many of the same soapboxes, Lisa.
Hey,
Even if
friend me on Facebook. You can watch me rant about this all the time. I don't think it's a lot. I have quite a few friends who are Janites, who uh, will interact with me when I go on my Austen or Bronte uh, uh, diatribes on my personal Facebook page, and a lot of people are just like, "Yeah, that's Lisa. Just keep scrolling along." She's going on about Austen. And what else is there?
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. I really, really appreciate you coming on. This is the first time that we've done anything like a YouTube post book kind of not a rehash or a dehash, but a kind of a retrospective, a look back, and I especially appreciate that it didn't just stick with Emma. I don't think you can talk about one book of Jane Austen's without talking about the rest, if you're going to be fair. And I love it.
I was telling Kate the librarian, who I've known for 15 years now, when she told me she had reached out to you, I was like, yeah, that's great, but I haven't read Emma in a long, long time, so I didn't think I was going to be able to contribute to the conversation.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, then I read Becca's blog post. I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to sit there and be quiet and nod occasionally. But yeah, I'm glad that it turned out to be a much more broader, in a lot of ways, nuanced conversation about Austen and the Brontes and Mary Wollstonecraft and everybody else that came along on our journey today.
Yeah, me too. This was a lot of fun. So the new YouTube CraftLit channel playlist for Vindication and the Rights of Women is actually under an old playlist name called The Weekly Constitutional, which I started in 2016, where I was talking to different lawyers every week about a new part of the Constitution, which people got sick and it ended. But that's where Vindication and the Rights of Women and Margaret Chase Smith's speech from the 50s, when she was the only person in the Senate to speak out against Joe McCarthy. It was the female senator from Maine, and her speech has been misrepresented as being something that it is not. And so when that happened, I woke up and had to record her real thing, just like I had to wake up and record Vindication on the Rights of Women. So
When does the audio go out?
we're trying to drop the audio for Vindication every day starting
No,
tomorrow.
I meant this one.
Oh, this one? I'm going to, since it went out on the wrong feed, I'm going to do an edit, like a quick edit to chop the beginning and the end off and try and give it chapter markers. So tomorrow night.
Okay. Yeah, because I've had people ask me who are like, I hate YouTube. So I am a member of good standing in 2 Jasna chapters. And one of them that I reached out to had said, yeah, this is great. We'll post it on our Facebook page. And she goes, so do you know when it's posted? I'm like, no, I'll get it to you when I get it to you.
Yeah. No, I will absolutely get you the link when I've got the real version up on the CraftLit site. Yeah. And we have had people watching. And in fact, Candy wrote in the chat, thank you for this discussion. So she found us here.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in, Candy. I'm very glad you were here. All right. You guys have a great week. I will go download and edit as fast as I can with my little hands, and we'll get this up. And I do have already in the show notes for the live stream that's showing on my personal page, which I'll just leave there, links to things that I either thought we were going to talk about or we didn't talk about, but were useful. And I'm going to be adding to that as we go, as I edit.
Sounds great.
Send me any links you think of things that we talked about, and then I will just throw them in there.
You have my link tree, and the only thing I think I would add would be the series Jane Bites Back by Michael Thomas Ford.
I wrote that down. Yep.
Yeah, good. All right, yeah, those would be the only things that I would probably add.
Done.
Yeah. So I got I mentioned that Emma is available in manga.
Yes.
And graphic novel, and so is Pride and Prejudice. There's those 2 are the ones that tend to get adapted the most. So
is your Goodreads link on your link tree?
No, but I will email you. You want the review for the manga?
No, I think people will probably want to be able to follow your tag, your Austinian-ish tag.
Austen-esque. Sure.
Yeah.
I'll email you that. I'll email
I think
that
people
link.
will like that. Yeah, because I assume that the graphic novels are listed there.
Depends. I've been on Goodreads since 2000, and
me too.
And I didn't start getting really into it on tagging and updating everything until probably the last 2-3 years. So I have a lot of content that's in there that isn't necessarily organized, but I'll see if I have it listed.
Alrighty, that'd be great. Thank you both.
Thank you, Heather. Bye,
Thank you. It was
Becca.
great meeting you.
Isn't
Have
it
a
great
good
meeting you
night.
as well?
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna call this thing and edit. Good night.